Just
Kimberly, good afternoon.
good afternoon. Thanks for
You and
having.
yeah, no, of course, you and I met through Doug Roberts,
Yes.
who runs the Institute for Educational Innovation and also has an incubator program for K-12 companies. And we clicked immediately as two revenue leaders who think about being buyer centric or buyer first. And in the course of our first conversation, you told me about this great story about launching Verizon's Federal program. You took a different approach. You were highly successful. It kind of shaped the arc of your career. So I'd love to hear more. You take us back to that moment now, 20 years ago, and you're in this role and you're trying to launch Verizon Federalists. And would love for you to share with the audience some of the story there.
Sure. And it's on the wireless side for Verizon Federal.
Yep.
New technology, really exciting, but generally known as a retail product, right? As a consumer-driven product. But now there's this opportunity to bring it into the federal government space. And as we started to do that, we got a lot of pushback from our leaders as to why we were driving so hard to get that customer, whether it's the Department of State, the members of Congress. And the reason behind it is the cost per sale was lower than the retail because we always had to bid for the service. And, we kind of went along for a little while. And at some point, our original manager said, you know what, maybe we should go a different direction. Well, she got promoted to a wonderful job in a new market, and I had the wonderful opportunity to take her place. And it was at that point where I decided, you know what, let me just take the success that I had as an account executive. So let me tell you that story. As an account executive in the federal government space, I really focused on the relationships with the agencies so that I could understand better what the problems are that we were going to be solving. And for anyone who knows the federal government, state government, it's a longer sales cycle than a traditional business to business experience. So it might take me, a quarter, 2 quarters, and in some cases, the entire fiscal year to close an opportunity. So I started building all these relationships, and I was getting my sales in, but I was not yet making quota. And I started to get a little bit of nudge about, we need you to make quota, Kimberly. Maybe you should do something. And I said, no, really, I'm building a pipeline that when you see it, it's gonna blow your mind. We are going to be very successful. Nonetheless, I still got a little poke on where are things going. And I'm happy to say, because of the relationships that I built over the time before the ending of the fiscal year, that next quarter, when it was time for me to report in my sales, I went from averaging around 87, 90% of quota to being 1,600% of quota at the end of the fiscal year. Never to turn back on being well over plan. Every year thereafter, I was top sales executive for 2 years for the entire company. And it just set the groundwork for when I got promoted to be the leader of the team and got the buy-in from the organization to say, listen, trust me here. I think I understand what's happening. And it really led to us building out our team because this happened right before what we all know now as Verizon, but the combined company was called Verizon. And we were able to take our small team of 20 people who've been completely focused on the federal government, negotiated the first national wireless contract with General Services Administration because of our existing relationships, and went on to, in our first year of being a team nationwide through a distributed sales network, to do $55 million in revenue.
Wow.
So we were able to demonstrate that this focus on buyer first, being relationship centric, was the key to our long-term success.
That's amazing. I mean, so I want to go back to first, what were you doing differently, right? You had a different approach than everybody else who wasn't 16% over quota. What were the main kind of contrasts that led to that incredible success?
Yeah, I just started building relationships around the agencies, not just centering on who I thought was the initial buyer. So I could bring in applications of wireless technology. So, I might be talking to procurement, but procurement's not really the buyer. The buyer is within the agency who has the real need and the application of our technology. So I just started building relationships across the agency so that by the time I got to procurement, they already knew who we were. They already knew how good we were. They all also knew that we were very reliable. And it made for the sale to go through much easier because I had relationships on the actual user side and then also with procurement.
Yep. And you also, I mean, you've talked about relationship and then nicely connected that so you could focus on the buyer problem.
Yes.
Curious in terms of how you interacted with people in the agency and maybe others that had a different approach. How did that change the nature of the conversations? Just
Yeah.
focusing
So,
on the buyer problem.
it changed it. And the way my approach was really different is the other sales team members were really focused on what's going to close faster, right? And I'm only going to focus on what's going to close faster. Where that's good. And that's why I was continuing to be at 87, 90% of quota, because you definitely needed to have those kind of deals. But I really invested more time in the relationships, again, across the agency. And my colleagues said, you know what, let me just go from agency to agency to agency, where I really didn't do that. Like I focused on several different agencies and saw success there. And once that happened, the rest was history.
So your colleagues had a slightly more transactional and you were just
Yes,
kind of deepening value across the agency, everybody who could derive value from a conversation with you.
that's correct.
Yep. So amazing success as an individual producer, which leads you to now be the leader of the team. Say more about, I mean, how did you then get, so you do 55 million in year one, so you got a whole team spun up on how to be more successful in this buyer first approach. How did you make that repeatable across the team, so to speak?
Yeah. So one thing is we landed this contract with GSA, which is the largest purchaser of goods and services really in the world. And because we had a national wireless contract, the teams in the markets all across the country could use that as a purchasing vehicle so that agencies that maybe in the past might not have been able to quickly be able to procure wireless services, they now had a vehicle in place that they could do that. So they didn't have to go through the traditional procurement cycle, which again, in the federal government can be a quarter or half year or the entire fiscal year. They could literally close business monthly now as an account executive.
Yep.
So that's how we were able to get our sales to that level in the first year.
And were you able, this idea of going from, transaction with an agency to, hey, let me lay, multi-threaded, it's now people call it, let me lay a bunch of lines out there to have a bigger pop with that agency. Were you able to build that skill in the team so people were thinking about less transactional and more, how do I think about holistically that account?
Well, we definitely got some admirers at the work that we were doing because our sales team was wildly successful. Many went on to be top leaders within the company after that. So seeing our approach here in this DC area, the markets across the country, the sales management teams across the country weren't necessarily focused on dedicating sales team members to the federal government. But after our first year, we started seeing more sales divisions across the country slotting spots for sales team members selling to the federal government. So the amount of people who were actually on the street increased significantly in years 2 and 3.
Got it. So as you guys demonstrated success, other kind of regional sales leaders said, hey, I should have a person dedicated against that as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And then you and I in the pre-call talked about, so had success as a individual producer, took this kind of team-wide, but it sounds like the lessons you learned there carried forward into your next roles that were totally different roles. Would love for you to
Yeah.
share more on how that carried forward.
Yeah, absolutely. After leaving Verizon, I really made a really sharp right turn to something completely different, out of my desire to really see kids become all that they could become. And uniquely in a situation where the bets are all against them, and that is kids who are in juvenile detention centers, one in particular here in Northern Virginia. And so I started a faith-based nonprofit focused on those kids to help them make one new decision once they were released that could really change their lives. And initially, I just started talking to the key stakeholders, the person who ran the juvenile detention center, the judges that would adjudicate their cases, the director of aftercare services for kids who are court involved, to understand what are the real issues, what would you like to see, what do you think would make the greatest difference before we started really actively creating programs. One quick story is that kind of my pathway to the heart of the girls, which is where I spent the majority of my time, was brownies. So when I would come in, I would bring brownies. And so they would love to talk about anything because I had brownies, but it allowed me to understand what is it that they really needed. And once I figured that out, then we created programs. We created a program to help kids learn how to advocate for themselves, not from a place of anger, but from a place of information, from a place of confidence. And it turned out to be very successful. So that if they had grievances with the staff, they wanted to have something added to their unit, they learned how to advocate for themselves in a way that they could get those things.
That's awesome. And then you mentioned, I mean, so there, what you said earlier is, is less about, started less with, hey, what are your programs? What are your programs? What are your programs? You're supposed to have when you have nonprofits, and
That's
more
right.
about the relationships to the kids and the key stakeholders. What did they need? What would make a difference? Letting them, as I heard you before, kind of build the programming.
Yes. And I'm happy to say that we just started adding more programs as we understood what the needs were. So we could have their buy-in, that they would participate. I mean, if anyone knows teenagers, it's really hard to get them engaged. And so we uniquely created our programs so that they would participate. And the only way we could know how to do that was with building relationships with them and with the staff in the facility.
Cool. And then you went on to another interesting role, event production, where you had kind of a different approach than most people took to event production.
Yeah, I do say that I was an event producer, and I felt like my role with the executive of the organization was to take their vision that they had on their iPad or on their laptop to their audience, but from a different perspective. Again, not focusing on, we need to do this, we need to do that, but really, what is it that they wanted them to leave that experience doing, whether it's thinking something different, taking an action, whatever that was. And then I would have teams that I would work with to create the programs and the experiences that would lead the audience to make those decisions or to take that action. Because you can get really caught up into, well, we should have, a photo booth so people can capture this, or we should have, music here, music there. And it's great and people are going to enjoy it. But if all it is just entertainment, then it's really lost the vision of the original idea, and that is for them to take an action or to think a certain kind of way.
Nice. And the other thing that you just talked about was kind of anchoring a little bit on the listener's why.
Yeah. Yeah, that to me is really important. And even in the work that we do today in K-12, focusing on why is someone going to choose our solution over something else, and really building in a relationship with them to discuss it, as opposed to creating a traditional tense-filled relationship between a salesperson and the customer, because the customer always thinks that you are wanting to sell them, right? And our goal is not to do that. Our goal is no, like, we really want to understand, what is your problem, right? What are you trying to solve for? What are the things you want to avoid? And we will even refer people to other solutions because our solution is not the solution that they're looking for. So we're trying to create a partnership as opposed to that traditional adversary kind of relationship that can occur with salespeople and customers when it's just a transaction.
Yeah, 100%. Love that. And I wanted to go back to thinking about that, back to you as team leader. So you modeled it for others. You're probably also modeling this idea of, this isn't about selling you something, it's about partnership, and we should be multi-threading, talking to multiple different folks. Was there this kind of idea of, like with a nonprofit, building stakeholder alignment? I'm curious if that was involved in how you led the team at
To do
Verizon
that, yeah.
Wireless.
Yeah, so at Verizon, I think, again, success is the tailwind, right? When people see that you are successful, then they get more curious and want to learn how to do that as well. So as they saw, in my leadership, my team would always, the sales reps would, but Kimberly, we should do this and we should do that. And we're going to do that, but here's what we need to do first. Because a lot of times what we have to do is to check the box for the customer. And some of those things take longer than a traditional sales transaction. And so to get them focused on having multiple contacts across their agency to be able to vie for them when it's now time to go to procurement and to actually get your deal done. You've got many, many more people weighing in on us as a company and you as an account executive. And that is very important. So even if, for instance, they got transferred to a different agency, our brand was still really strong because we've been consistent. We were open to new ideas and new ways to apply the wireless, where our competitors were like, this is all it is. This is all we can do, and walk away. We were always very open. So I think modeling that openness from the account executive's perspective, and really learning that it's all about your funnel management, right? It's all about having enough sales in the deal and your funnel so that you aren't relying just on these 20 that you think you're going to close next month. You've got 100 across 5 agencies where you now can close business over a longer period of time.
Yeah, love it. The other thing I heard there is open to new ideas and new ways to apply wireless. I'm guessing there was probably some team-based learning process, like people coming back and, hey, this worked for me, go try with your agencies. Can you say more about that?
I sure can. Yeah, so I'll date myself a little bit here, but I'm okay with that. One of the things, 2 applications that we did, the first one being providing the wireless technology in the tunnels of the Capitol. So once we did that, first ever in the nation, WMATA, which is the metro here in Washington, D.C., thought maybe we could do that here. And so the good news is that the sales account executives were on the same team. So they started to share their stories. And since our network engineers had done the work at the Capitol, we brought them in to talk to WMATA about bringing wireless technology into the tunnels of the metro here. So a lot of learning. We did a lot of application sharing. We used to talk every month, at least once, about the different applications of wireless technologies within our accounts so that the team could have a broader understanding of what could be possible.
I love that. Within the accounts, a broader understanding of what was possible.
And I think, network engineers, electric engineers really love new ideas and new ways to use technology. And so we had a CTO that was really excited about being able to do that. So it gave us the ability to let them be able to explore what could be possible with real customers.
Yep. We started talking about buyer first or buyer centricity. Really, it is not thinking about your product or your program, but personalizing, right?
Yeah.
Personalizing value to the other person. And what I love about your story is it sort of starts as a story about how focusing on personalization and relationships can make you a better individual producer, but it can make you a better leader. And then the nonprofit story can make you a better human being, right?
Yes, it can. It really
Because
can.
if you're focused on those around you and serving them, you can have a lot of impacts that aren't commercial.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you can know that you were part of building something that lasts. One of the things I'm most excited about is fast forward all these years, not only is the Federal Wireless Division active, they are wildly successful, one of the greatest revenue producers within Verizon in general, because of the initial foundation of the work that we did and the work that I got a chance to lead.
That's awesome. It's a great end of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Kimberly, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story with our audience.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.